It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Pure Performance. My name is Brian Wilson, and as always, we have with me, that's awesome. We have with me our co-host, Andy Grabner. How are you doing today, Andy?
Good. Have you been drinking again with your other personality?
I just had 3 shots of espresso.
Okay, yeah.
So
2 for you, 1 for the other Brian. Yeah, makes sense.
Yes, 1 for the entity.
Yeah.
Known as Brian. Yeah. We all have, as of this recording, which the World Cup will be over, we all still have teams in play.
Oh, yeah.
So,
shall we make a prediction, though? I think this would be something for the opening. Once we introduce our guest.
We should mention who we're playing, right? So, U.S. is playing Turkey next. Andy, Austria is playing, what did you say it was? Argentina?
Algeria. We just played Argentina and lost against, we didn't lose against Argentina, we lost against Messi. So that's the fair statement to make. Yeah, and we just need to draw against Algeria to advance into the knockout phase.
And Dan, what's Scotland playing against?
Oh, Scotland's playing easy, Brazil.
Okay.
Yeah, that's an easy game in the group phase.
What do you need to win to advance, or what do you need a draw? What do you need?
I think a draw would do it, but we're aiming for the 3rd place and see if we can get that way again.
Awesome. I have no idea what we need.
I think the US is already in the next round because you won both of your first 2 games.
Okay.
I think you're good, if I'm not mistaken. But hey, you know what? That actually already introduced kind of our guest, or at least we'll let him speak already. Dan Gomez Blanco, thank you so much for being again on the show. And also thanks for the reminder. The last time we spoke was 3 years ago on Pure Performance. Folks, we will also link to the episodes. Back then it was called Adopting Open Observability Across Your Organization. And back then you were at a different company. You switched, right? You were at Skyscanner.
I did. I was an end user back then. And since then, I've been, I guess, really interested in continuing to talk to end users. And from Skyscanner, from leading observability there and writing practical OpenTelemetry. I think that's the reason why we were in the previous podcast. So I now work for New Relic as a principal observability architect, and I do still work with end users to adopt best practices in observability, best practices in adopting OpenTelemetry, and I've been during all these years part of the community, part of the OTel community. Been part of the governance committee and maintaining or co-maintaining the end user special interest group in OTel, with now a renewed focus on OTel blueprints, which is what we're talking about today.
Hey, one comment and one question. First of all, the comment similar to what we did in the previous recording where we had Josh Lee on and also Adriana. It's great that the OpenTelemetry community doesn't care about organizational or like competitive challenges that we have, right? So we're working all in the same field. Even though we are competitors on paper, we are a community in real life, and we work together and really want to make sure we help our end users. So that's great. Absolutely. The question that I have with the end user SIG, that means you're also working with Adriana because she's also in there, right?
Correct. Yeah. Adriana, Rees, and Andre both are co-maintainers of the end user SIG. And, what we're doing in that special interest group so far has been work with, we have OpenTelemetry Live as live sessions within, their YouTube and LinkedIn Live with end users that tell us about their adoption challenges, their learnings, also with maintainers that basically, bring up like news of what's happening in OpenTelemetry. Sometimes people that, employees from different vendors come and talk about, some best practice, all in a completely vendor neutral way. I think this is, what you were saying before. as maintainers of an end user special interest group, we always have to keep the bar, high in terms of like non-sales pitchy stuff. Right? They're always keeping it vendor neutral.
Yeah, cool. And the reason why I think it was Adriana who brought it up, or maybe I also happened to then see your LinkedIn post or your blog posts around the new blueprints and also the reference implementations. And this is really why we're here today, because in my world, also Brian, right, we both of us, we work with end users, organizations that are trying to implement observability, and whether they're using agents or OpenTelemetry. Most of them obviously are now moving into the world of OpenTelemetry. They always ask, so how do I do this right? I know the documentation. I've played around with AstroShop, with the different demo apps. I understand how to collect the log. I understand how to set up a single collector and send it to any type of backend. But how do I basically get this into an enterprise scale? Right? How do I get beyond the honeymoon phase of I've done a POC and a demo towards scaling this for real? So I would like to learn from you a background about these blueprints, about these reference implementations, and how we can also encourage more people to share their lessons learned and their learnings with you and your community.
Yes, I think I should probably say first that Blueprints or OTel Blueprints is what's called an initiative or a project within OpenTelemetry. So this is something that allows us as a community to bring together people from multiple special interest groups, multiple SIGs, multiple backgrounds. And now we even got like end users involved in this initiative, right? So it allows us to basically publicize some work that we want the community to feed back into, right? With OTel Blueprints, this is something that's been in my mind for a long time, to basically put together some common patterns, common design patterns, and common challenges that companies and organizations find when they adopt OTel. And also, a way for the community to talk about these best practices. I think it can be useful as well for maintainers to understand what are the friction points and then what we can improve as a project, right? Mm-hmm. So, that was open, that was approved as a project. We kicked it off maybe, I think, 2 or 3 months ago. And then we've had people like co-leads there in that project, like Lucas and Tiffany, that work with me in OTel Blueprints, and we've making some really good progress.
Mm-hmm. I got a question for you. And when in your day work, right, at New Relic, and we in our day work at Dynatrace, it is sometimes hard to get our users to publicly talk about how they're adopting certain things. Do you think this is easier with OpenTelemetry because it's open source, or do you still have to go through similar hoops to get these organizations to publicly say? Because you have 3, right? You have Adobe, you have Mastodon, you have Skyscanner. I'm sure there's more coming. Is it easier or more challenging?
It's easier. I think it's easier because we are very clear as well when we, if and by the way, if you're an end user and you're listening to this, we are calling out for end users to give us to share the reference architectures. And then we don't want to talk about anything that relates to the back end. So if you use Dynatrace, or if you use New Relic, or if you use whatever, Grafana, it's okay, but we don't want to talk about that in the reference implementation. It's not applicable to the scope of OTel, right? Mm-hmm. So what we're interested in the OpenTelemetry scope. And because it's all open source, it makes it a little bit easier to share. Another aspect is that sometimes people don't even want to talk about their infrastructure or how they deploy, workloads. That's a bit more challenging if some companies may have some type of policy internally that just forbids them from talking about their infrastructure. You can't really get around that. But reference architectures do give us a framework. And what we've heard from end users is that we're not like, when we ask someone to come and share their reference architecture, we give them a template. And this template explains how to share it well, basically, how to tell a story. What do we want to learn from you? And that's really important for them as well, for some of them, to share to their whatever, like compliance or legal team and say, look, this is the type of information that I will be sharing. And here's some previous examples. And that helps, right? Helps them internally as well.
Mm-hmm. And that also means if the template, I also saw this, I think it's well documented and folks will be sharing all the relevant links. I think you have links to GitHub issues or GitHub repositories where you can open up a new issue that is based on a blueprint template or a reference implementation, and then you just fill out all the relevant fields. For those people that are listening in and they are contemplating, but they say, well, I don't have a lot of time and I don't know how to write. Is it part of your role and your SIG's role also to then guide people through the actual writing process and then tidying it up and making it presentable?
Yeah, in fact, there is when you open an issue, there is an issue template. And one of the questions we ask is, what level of involvement do you want to have in this? Either you want to write it all yourself, or you can write part of it, but we can help you write that reference architecture. Of course, if we would prefer, we all basically have limited bandwidth, right?
Yeah,
so you come and write it. We can't really say, yeah, we'll be there for everyone that wants to come and, we'll write it for you. But, we will prioritize that accordingly as well.
Well, maybe a shout out for people to use some of your tokens for
actually that's the way that, and I should give a shout out to the developer experience SIG, which they've done a lot of the work already without this sort of like umbrella of a project. They interviewed a bunch of Skyscanner, Mastodon, Adobe. They interviewed them and then they wrote the reference architectures or the reference implementations for them as blog posts. So when we were starting this project for OTel blueprints and reference architectures, we almost didn't know that was happening in the background. This happens sometimes in OTel. It's a very big project, right? So you don't really know everything that's happening. And then we found out that they were already about to publish these. So then we said, okay, we've got these reference implementations already. Let's give it a framework so that the next ones, we can do it a bit more self-serve. But also, make sure that we can help people in the process as well.
Yeah, I think it might be a good idea too for this to just take a step back for our listeners and explain what the blueprints are and what problem they're addressing, right? Yeah. Because there's, as we were talking yesterday, in the last episode, but yesterday for us, there was, towards the end of the podcast, we started talking about, beyond the quote-unquote complexities or the nuances, let's say, of deploying OpenTelemetry to your system. Now it's how do you start managing and configuring your collectors and all that, right? So let's just take a step back and talk about what is this blueprint addressing? What kind of problems do people typically run into where these are going to be really useful? And by the way, I want to say the fact that these are being created now really speaks as a testament to the maturity of OpenTelemetry, right? Yeah. So it's fantastic to hear that this is going on, because it's this is just chugging along happily, and it's awesome to see that this is coming up.
So let's take a couple of steps back, and I think also address the fact that blueprints, or the term blueprints, was something that was raised during the graduation process for OpenTelemetry. Now, we're all celebrating that OTel graduated as a CNCF project, but part of that process involves going through a bunch of checks, right, in terms of contributor health and security and so on. One of them is about end user feedback, and the feedback that we got from end users during that graduation process was that they needed a way to start to think about OTel strategy, or the way to deploy OTel. And this is where define deploy OTel. And this is where I started to think when people say, I deployed OpenTelemetry and I don't get much value from it, for example, I don't know, if someone makes that assessment, what do they mean by I deployed OTel? Did they just pick up a collector, put it into a host, got some infrastructure metrics? That could be deploying OTel. Or did they added the Java agent or the Java instrumentation agent to their workloads and they, called it a day? That could be as well. So the term deploying OTel could mean different things to different people, right? So with blueprints, what we wanted to do is take these reference implementations and the experience that we have by working with end users and extract these common patterns, right? These common challenges that people are trying to solve in specific environments. So the challenges that a team that is operating a Kubernetes cluster and wants to monitor the workloads on that cluster will be different from a team that is the cloud ops team that is in charge of the underlying infrastructure, or an application team that wants to connect browser telemetry to their backend and have a full story there. But there's one common theme for blueprints, which is that we want them to be something that connects multiple components. So there is a part of OTel that is complex, and that is, I think I mentioned that in the original blog post introducing blueprints, is when we talk about complexity, we have two types, right? And this is coming from that Fred Brooks paper from 1986, which is the year I was born, by the way. Which is no silver bullet. You have why is stuff so complex? And you have essential complexity, and you have accidental complexity. And OTel has a lot of accidental complexity, but also some essential complexity. OTel is very broad in the way that it goes from, as I said, from client-side, browser, mobile, to infrastructure, to serverless, and Kubernetes, and host monitoring. So all these things, if you deploy them in a way that is not aligned, or between these workloads, you could end up with the very problem that OTel was trying to solve, which is uncontextualized data, low quality data, low value or ROI being quite low in terms of the data that you produce. So that is the accidental part. So what we're trying to do with blueprints is acknowledge the OTel can be complex, and then think about how do we make it simpler to string together a strategy to do it.
But I need to take notes, because I think some of the things you just said, first of all, yes, they're written in the blog, but it also will make a good soundbite for promoting this blog post, because, as you said, people are adopting OpenTelemetry, and in the end, they want to see the value out of it. And the pure fact that we acknowledge that it solves a complex problem and therefore it needs guidance is good, right? And hopefully this will get more people to think about this. You mentioned that it's a different scenario when somebody tries to monitor their Kubernetes cluster that they have under control, or whether you're monitoring non-Kubernetes workloads. And I think actually the first blueprint that I've seen out there is exactly talking about how do you use OpenTelemetry to monitor your infrastructure and your processes.
Yeah. Which some people think, or have said already, oh, that's interesting, because we think about CNCF, cloud native, Kubernetes, OTel works really well there. But the first blueprint that we released was non-Kubernetes, bare metal and containerized workloads outside of Kubernetes. And that actually made me quite happy, because that's probably one of the areas in OTel where people are a bit less supported by the tooling. So if you run on Kubernetes, it's going to be a little bit easier to deploy something that, you have that orchestration layer. That will make it easier to deploy a centralized strategy. Yeah. But if you're outside of that, and then, in bare metal infrastructure and so on, it becomes a little bit more difficult. And quite happy to see as well the collaboration that happened there to, basically describe how to work with OPAMP as the protocol for management of agents, including collectors, but also the fact that we're also contributing or collaborating with some of the maintainers to say, are we ready to recommend this at scale? Are people using OPAMP at scale? So there is a caveat in that saying, okay, OPAMP is being used in production. We recommend it as part of a blueprint. But the specification is in beta, so things could change, right? Which is okay. Blueprints are not supposed to be the OpenTelemetry specification. Yeah. We will change advice in a blueprint maybe in the future to say, well, maybe it's better to use a different way of doing this But yeah, that's part of the evolution of a project, right?
Yeah. For me, it's interesting, and I've also had so many conversations where I said, do you use OpenTelemetry? And then I said, why would we use OpenTelemetry? We're not on Kubernetes. And then I said, right, because we are, I think obviously it was born in that CNCF cloud native bubble. And obviously within our bubble, we know that everybody knows OpenTelemetry. But it's also interesting that outside of that bubble, people think it's just something that is born here and is constrained to Kubernetes and cloud native. And I think it's good. This is also why I like the fact that that the first blueprint is around this topic.
Actually, there has been a long run in SIG that is coming up with tooling and guidance for OpenTelemetry on mainframes. So
yeah,
Nice.
yeah. I remember that also we have. I think some of our team colleagues. Mainframe is a big topic for our customers that we all have, right? New Relic and Datadog and we. We had a mainframe agent for a long time, and didn't we, Brian? We did a podcast on OpenTelemetry for mainframe.
I believe so. Sounds familiar. Right? Yeah. So I remember being like, "Wait, you can use OpenTelemetry on mainframe?" It makes complete sense, but you don't think of it that way because you're like mainframe, OpenTelemetry. There's too much of a gap. But it's when you go back and think about what it's doing, it's like, oh yeah, it's just doing what our agent's doing. Of course, it can do it.
And then maybe. Sorry, I was going to say the amount of people that that are now using it in IoT and different way. Like OpenTelemetry is really everywhere. Really.
Yeah. It is, and this is also I wanted to say the collectors at scale and open at scale, BindPlane, who we I think all know. I remember one of their blog posts. I think it's with Mercedes or one of their reference implementations, right, where they're using a million of collectors that they're managing, because I think they have collectors installed in every car or every truck or whatever it is, right? So this definitely works at scale. Yeah,
it does. Yeah.
So blueprints. Any other blueprints maybe been worked on?
Yeah. So there's one that I think will be published by the time this particular episode is released, which is the one that I'm personally authoring on managed telemetry platforms in Kubernetes environments. So we go for this is perhaps the most common. The most common patterns, the most common design patterns. And specifically, this is aimed at more of a platform engineering approach to managing a centralized telemetry platform. And what we mean by platform, I guess you'll know this well, Andy, as well, is not just the infrastructure, right? I think this is one of the things that we need to think about. It's not just about the collector architecture either. Is how you make it easy for the rest of your organization, and that will be people in charge of applications, to emit telemetry that's high quality, right? Mm-hmm. So it touches on things like the operator, the Kubernetes operator for OpenTelemetry to automatically inject instrumentation into workloads, but also acknowledges that not everyone is able to run an operator, and there may make more sense to integrate with other CI tooling, like perhaps like base Docker images, or any way that one can control that base layer of configuration for OTel, and then allow these teams to emit or to control the telemetry that is on top. But it also goes into, of course, some of the collector architecture and gateways and how to build reliable pipelines as well. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's something that will be published soon, and I think is one of perhaps the most common patterns that we've seen in the industry on that.
So basically, providing observability as a self-service kind of through, providing. Yeah, as I said, I think making observability easy, accessible, and implementable for everybody. And the key thing here is that you're enforcing standards, right? Because I think the biggest thing, what we also discussed yesterday, is around data quality. Yeah. It doesn't make sense if we just say we're collecting all the data we can, but we actually don't know which data we really need. We had a quote yesterday, actually from Umar from Autodesk, and I need to put it up again because I thought This was such a nice quote from him, where he talked about instrument by value, not by default. So instrument really what provides you the value that you need out of observability, and don't just go with the default, because the default gives you a lot of data, but the question is if it gives you what you really need.
Yeah, and there's an aspect as well, and of cost, and it's not just cost, right? When you think about high quality telemetry, if you're like inundated by low quality telemetry, that is also affecting the way that you reason about a system, right? You have a lot of noise. It will become more difficult for you to reason about it, and it will become more costly for your agents to reason about it too, right?
Yeah.
So it's about storing what really matters as well. And even, I think I spoke to Anne Curry that has a podcast on, but she's one of the authors of Building Green Software. It's a really good book, by the way, I recommend reading. And it's about storing what matters as well. If you want to sort of like be more carbon neutral, or be more efficient in the way that you store data, or the way that you emit carbon emissions, there is an aspect of storing data that is unrelated to the compute resources, or how you may generate carbon emissions from power in the devices, but also the embodied carbon in the storage devices that are used for that data. So anyway, so what this says is if you store less data and the data that matters to you, your carbon emissions will be reduced as well. So it's a matter of that as well.
Yeah, we'll definitely. So you said Building Green Software?
Yes.
The book? Perfect, yeah. So folks, we will add this to the show notes.
To try to get.
Yeah, another guest, exactly. Please, Dan, do an introduction, and we'll get in on the podcast.
And if we are, to be honest, if we're talking about, I wanted to mention another book that I would recommend as part of this blueprints things, because the format that the structure of blueprints is based on an old book that's called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard Rumelt. And I think that's a book that changed my life a little bit a few years ago, because it basically deals with how one thinks, or one should think about strategy, and how to scope a strategy to solve certain problems. So the way that blueprints, and this is what people can expect from OTel blueprints, is that the way that we scope the area that we'll be tackling with these recommendations and these design patterns is by looking at the common challenges that need to be solved. So we will not recommend anything that doesn't solve a real problem for people. So the idea is that you go through first a diagnosis phase, where you list the common problems. You then go through a phase where you add some guidelines or some recommendations. And then you go through a set of implementation actions that implement those guidelines. So it's a very well-structured sort of problem, guideline, actions. And I think that this is great to build a story of a strategy and a blueprint that actually solves problems. It's not just this is some cool tooling that you should adopt, right?
Yeah.
Do you know? Go on. I was going to say this brings two thoughts to mind that I think are really important with these blueprints, right? In the previous episode, Andy, we were talking about, a lot of times people will say, I want to do OpenTelemetry because I want to, the whole vendor lock-in thing, right? But that's the reason. There's no thought behind that reason. It's just, I hear vendor neutral, I want to do that, right? So two things that the blueprint gives on that side. Number one, just as we always say with I want to move to serverless, I want to move to Kubernetes. Why? What are you going to get out of it, right? If you have these blueprints, it's we want to do this, and looking at what the blueprint does and how this does, I can translate that into all the benefits that I can get from it and all the advantage of doing that. But also, we see a lot that customers are starting on their, as you mentioned earlier, Dan, they want to start moving over to OTel. Where do I start? How do I do it? And all, right? And it becomes a resume builder to go to OpenTelemetry. Sometimes that's the only reason is look, I did it. And I think, to me, the goal would be, let's make it so OTel is no longer a resume builder. because it becomes so easy. You have exactly what you need to do. You have the best practices. It's like, oh, we want to do OTel. Great, we know it's not a big thing anymore, right? Like the dial-up connection versus the always-on with the cable modem, right? And then that extends into the idea if there are good blueprints and good practices as you're going through and using different forms of AI to assist you in all these things. If there are best practices, if there are blueprints, it's easier to give the instruction based on that than, hey, I want to do this. Well, how do you want to do it? Well, I have now an exact, a manifest of what I want to do based on best practices. That'll, again, make this all easier because at the end of the day, like, yeah, we all work at vendors and we want people to buy our software. But at the end of the day, our passion is really like, make sure you've got observability on, make sure you have a really good performing website, right? That's why we love what we do, is because we want to see all that. And everybody, obviously, with the OpenTelemetry community, especially the people maintaining the OTel bit, right? It just makes that entry point much more purposeful and, in the end, easier so that we get, great performing software and we're not getting angry to say, why is it taking so long?
Yeah. I think one of the things that we have in our roadmap, unofficial roadmap, I guess, we have ideas. What happens after we release these first blueprints is making the output of a blueprint a little bit more structured for agents, right? Mm-hmm. At the moment, you can feed the whole blueprint and it might be like 4,000, 6,000 words that, an agent will take it in its context. I think it's fine. However, if you were to structure it in a different way, for example, like using scales or using other ways that, that agentic workflows may use it in a more optimal way, then that would also help massively, I think.
So from blueprints to blue skills. I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah. I think that's if you think about a scale, all of these, I was mentioning there the fact that blueprints are, common challenge, and here's a guideline, here is the step. That's almost what a scale is, right? You tell an agent, every time you see this, which is your challenge, apply this guideline, and then maybe, you give it a set of steps to apply. So, I don't know. It's just, I think we have a lot of years of strategic thinking and whatnot, and many books written, but it's very simple at the end, right? It's like problem, guideline, set of steps to implement it, and it just works.
Mm-hmm. Are you also hearing a request for blueprints, or maybe it's a reference implementation, but how to gradually convert an existing observability implementation, whether it's homegrown or through agents, over to OpenTelemetry? Do you have any, because this came up in the conversation I recently had, so really specifically asking, how do I convert if I have, let's say I have a tool X right now and I want to convert this over to OpenTelemetry? What are the things I need to look out for?
That specifically hasn't come up yet. Well, what has come up during conversations, and we were talking about this at KubeCon in this is before the project properly started, but we had a session to almost like to bootstrap the Blueprints initiative at KubeCon Amsterdam. So that was in February, March, something like that. Mm-hmm. And this relates to that, because we were talking about we're taking blueprints, and then we have specific vendors or specific solutions or backends that may have their own standard, right? How do these two layer up? And I think, one of the things that we would consider is something like the OpenTelemetry demo has something similar, right? There's the OpenTelemetry demo, like the vanilla one. And then as a vendor, you can have a fork of the OpenTelemetry demo that you may apply your specific settings on top. Mm-hmm. So I think blueprints could have a similar sort of impact, right? Where like you can take a blueprint and then you can say, well, if you want to do this with backend X, and if you're running already, because it doesn't really align, it doesn't really answer your question specifically. But if you were to be here in this particular proprietary format, and then you want to move to OTel into this blueprint, maybe there is like an extension to that or something.
Mm-hmm. Good idea. Cool.
Hey, Andy, that makes me think too, and I guess this would apply to you as well, Dan, that like, it seems like it would be beneficial for vendors to create blueprints for data enrichment for their backend tools, right? So if you think about, raw data comes in, and if you just leave it all raw without anything, you'll have traces, logs, and metrics, and they'll be separated. But like, for instance, if you're going to attach a log to a trace, you want that trace ID in the log or things like that. But also there's other metadata, like I know in some Dynatrace processes, like if we're using our agent and collector to grab the OTel data, there's some natural metadata enrichment we do before we send it back to us, right? But if you're doing just pure OTel play, like I think, this is the blueprint on getting the most out of your backend platform with the OTel data. Yeah. Here's where you'll want to do whatever enrichment if it's not something that could be done on. I mean, just thinking like blueprints, they wouldn't be obviously something that the OTel community would do, right? I mean, more like, it'd probably be a really cool idea for vendors to come out with like, here's best practices for OTel for our platform. Yeah. Not the design side, but the data feed side,
Yeah, I think, part of that is, the work on distributions, right? If you have an OTel distribution for a particular backend, then that encodes some of that, some of those standards. But yeah, to your point, I do think that sometimes it makes sense to extend that. It's not just about the binary that you deploy. It's not just about the config. It's like, I don't know, maybe all the things that go with that, and I can see value in that as well.
And ideally, obviously, the answer of the OTel community should be vendor X if you have something specific, and it's not just valuable for you, but it would be something valuable for everybody. Why not work with the OTel community and extend OpenTelemetry itself, right?
I mean, the advice that hopefully, the advice that we put in blueprints is applicable everywhere, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Hey, Dan. So we talked about blueprints, where one is out there, non-Kubernetes environments. You're working with one on managed telemetry platforms for Kubernetes workloads. Now, can we talk a little bit about those reference implementations? These are those that organizations, end users are contributing, where they basically talk about the implementation. Can you give us an example of one of those that have been part of the initial publish, and then what people can learn out of it? Yep.
I'll probably choose, if I were to choose one, I'd choose a Skyscanner one.
Yeah, of course.
But it makes me really happy that it wasn't me that did it. Right? It makes me happy that, after I left and, I was part of leading that strategy, but someone else takes their baton and now is part of the OTel community, right? So I think that's one of the cases where OTel was used for, to basically, and I think they mentioned that in that reference implementation, is that one of the reasons to adopt OTel was to actually move to a vendor, right, while remaining vendor neutral in their implementation. So that's something that we've seen from many end users, that they want to perhaps move towards a platform engineering type of organization where they want to empower the rest of the organization to move faster, but that perhaps means that they don't run their own OS stack, and they can still run open source internally without the vendor lock-in of a particular solution, and remain more aligned with the rest of the cloud native environments or ecosystem. But they do that with OTel. So some of the patterns that were listed there, I think, were also listed in other reference implementations. Like, for example, Adobe were running a central gateway for telemetry. So they have their individual teams that publish telemetry into a central gateway, and two of these, I think the Mastodon one was a bit different, where they were running one collector deployment per namespace, while Adobe and Skyscanner were running that central gateway, that central collector gateway the difference in them, and all this is actually mentioned in the blueprint about managed telemetry platforms. The difference then was like Skyscanner runs one single deployment for the collector gateway for metrics, traces, and logs, with different configuration for memory limiter configurations in each of the pipelines. So if you want to start applying back pressure earlier on logs or on spans that you do on metrics, for example, while Adobe went for a solution where they have different gateway deployments per signal. So they have one gateway deployment for metrics, one gateway for traces, one gateway for logs. Both options are equally valid, right?
Yeah.
It depends on, there's always going to be a trade-off between them.
You basically introduce deployment complexity, but you may gain some stability and resiliency for certain things. Yeah.
Resource allocation maybe is easier. Yeah. So I think both are valid, and it's great to see those actually being used at a scale of those companies.
Yeah. Cool. So folks, if you're listening in and if it's the first time you hear about this, please do me a favor, go to the links, check out these Adobe Mastodon and Skyscanner reference implementations. Also check out the blueprints. By the time when this episode airs, there will be at least a second blueprint that was just released by Dan. And contribute, right? Contributions. We are always looking for contributions. If you have implemented OpenTelemetry at small scale or at big scale, I think there's no minimum complexity.
Required.
Yeah, no minimum requirement. It's good. Please share with us. Is there any? I have one more question. This might be a little bit unrelated to just the blueprint discussion, but coming back to this vendor neutrality. Obviously, you are also working for a vendor, New Relic. You also have your agents. Obviously, as the world is moving towards OpenTelemetry, we are agreeing that the data that can come in, the thing that we can do within an application that we're observing, is set by what OpenTelemetry can do. Over the years, you guys at New Relic, the folks at Datadog and AppD and Instant and how they're all called, and Dynatrace, we've all invested in agents, and we've also built our own capabilities that are beyond what OpenTelemetry currently provides. Right? So in our case, I think of live debugging, right? That's one capability. Yeah. I'm sure you have something similar. Yeah. How can we, is there any blueprint or best practice on how you can balance both, kind of getting the openness and the openness and the standard of OpenTelemetry while still getting some of these capabilities that vendors have put in, and can they still coexist? And is there any blueprint best practice?
That would be a best practice for vendors. And I think, I've seen like two approaches to this. And one is like, you go down the route of a distribution, which you can, in an OTel distribution, and I should explain what that is, because sometimes, we don't always get to know that. Is like, a distribution is a repackaging of OpenTelemetry components in a way that works the best with a particular backend. So that could be taking components in particular versions, a configuration that's applied in a particular way. There are certain requirements for the collector distributions, for example. If you have a collector distribution, you need to make it extensible. It needs to read OpenTelemetry collector config. Like the schema needs to be, so there's some requirements for you to be able to call it a distribution of a collector, right? But in general, that is the case. And most importantly, this is why I wanted to mention this, you are allowed to extend that distribution with your own stuff, right? So if you're a vendor, and like, you're allowed to do that. The other option is that you take your, and I think, some vendors there like Dynatrace, we do it as well at New Relic, that is integrating or adding OTel support within the existing agents, right? Within the existing, so like that interoperability there, which is, I think, I would hope that is like perhaps more and more of a, hopefully in the future, less of instrumentation is added in a proprietary way, and more is so like picked up not just from OpenTelemetry, And I think this is where like we're starting to see this change now. And this makes me really excited because you mentioned like there are three phases, right? One is we had all vendors do their own instrumentation. Second, we moved to OpenTelemetry. Now, OpenTelemetry provides a lot of the instrumentation. And now what we're seeing is like OpenTelemetry is not able to, so let's say, proprietary agents provided some of the instrumentation, but they were finding it hard to scale to the number of open source libraries that are there, right? Instrumenting everything is impossible. Then OpenTelemetry came in and you had 14,000 developers each year contributing to OTel. So then, you might be able to have higher velocity in terms of like integrating with a lot of different open source libraries out there. And if you don't find it, you're the owner of that library, you can contribute to OTel and add it. However, what we're seeing now more and more, which is the ultimate vision of OpenTelemetry, is that open source libraries themselves come instrumented with OTel. This is one of the key differences here with proprietary agents, is that the OTel API is completely decoupled from its implementation. So like we're seeing, especially in the GenAI space, lots of tooling out there that's already built in with OTel natively, or that you can just enable OTel export. For example, if you take Claude code, you can just say, here's my OTOP endpoint. And Claude code will just send that data to a central place, right? So I think we're seeing more and more of that. And I think that is where like the next phase will be, where like OTel just maybe have the base instrumentation for the most common things, but more and more libraries out there will start to use OTel native.
Yeah. And also, we are both working for vendors, so we both know that all of us vendors over many, many years, we had to reverse engineer the same libraries to figure out how to instrument it. Yeah. And this is obviously now done in a more economical, sustainable, better way by the people that actually know that code and not somebody that has not written the code but needs to figure out how to instrument it. Yeah.
And also good. You may release a new feature and then as a library owner, right? You want that feature to have like observability from right? With your feature. So.
Yeah. Hey, one last question, because this came also up yesterday in the discussion with Adriana and Josh. Will the blueprints also cover best practices for developers for instrumenting the code, or will it just focus on the deployment of kind of the data pipeline? Because this was one of the things that they brought up, is that there still needs to be education and tooling for developers to make sure their instrumentation provides value and it's not just collecting any type of data.
Yeah, I think right now we are focused on the not just infrastructure but on the X as a service like type of way. So you have either an observability team or a platform team that's in charge of helping to the rest of the organization to adopt OTel in these patterns. However, there was when I was writing this particular blueprint for managed telemetry platforms, one of the aspects that we want to extend is related to telemetry quality. And that starts to go into that space, right? How do you actually write good telemetry? And we know that Weaver, as a tool in OpenTelemetry to manage semantic conventions registries and to measure if your data is let's say, compliant with the semantic conventions that you have, that will be another blueprint that we'll want to do in the future. And I think, where that moves closer to the developer surface. And I think in that one, we'll probably make it'd be a good idea. It'll make sense to cover some of these aspects about when should you use metrics, or when should you use logs or spans, or
Yeah, and also detecting things like like Brian, you mentioned earlier, logs that are emitted by an app should always have a trace ID, or there should not be duplicated spans, spans without the right attributes and things like that. Yeah.
So there's an aspect where at the moment we've only got 2 blueprints and they're a little bit I wouldn't say tangential, they're parallel. In the way that there's a little bit of overlapping between some of the recommended patterns between non-Kubernetes and Kubernetes environments, but they're generally parallel. However, those will have extension points, right? And this one, for example, for managed telemetry platforms, I'm calling out please come and help us to write these. for Weaver, for example, semantic conventions, or for compliance and regulatory, like, I don't know, requirements in terms of maybe you have like FIPA or sort of FIPS or HIPAA or some requirements that you need your collectors to comply with. And then this is not covered in this blueprint, right? We just sort of like call that out of scope for this one. But in a future blueprint, we can cover that.
Yeah. Cool. Dan, thank you so much for coming on the show, back on the show after a couple of years now, talking and enlightening us about blueprints and reference architectures, hopefully also encouraging many of our listeners to also think about contributing, not just consuming, but also contributing. And we'll make sure to have all of the links in the podcast description, in the notes. Brian, any final thoughts, words from you?
No, I just think it's an exciting time for OTel, right? Besides being, graduate or whatever you call the official repository, right? These ideas like blueprints, I think seeing what the agentic models are doing with OpenTelemetry built in, we're now starting to see, because I remember here, and I mentioned this on other podcasts, right? When I first heard OpenTelemetry, there was this idea that like all these code vendors and stuff are going to start baking it in, right? Haven't seen it, and now it's, at least on the AI model side, it's all baked in, and it's amazing to see. You just, again, export it, and all this stuff lights up. So I think there's a lot of real-world proof for people to say, yeah, this is real, especially for the open source, code developers to start adding it in, right? Because that's where we start getting all the promise. So I think it's basically an inflection point right now, and it's an exciting one to see where this will continue to grow and what everyone can do with it. So Dan, thank you so much for being on and sharing all this awesome information.
Thanks for having me. It was
and
a pleasure.
All the best for Scotland for the game.
Yes.
Yeah.
All the best for Austria.
Thank you. And for the US too.
Yes.
The US.
Here we go.
We've won World Cups, just not men. Thank you all. Thanks everyone for listening.
You.
Enjoy.
Bye.
Bye-bye.